You were born for this. Empire awaits you with open jaws.
Hey, if you're looking for a cheap build that can clear with huge explosions and can scale all the way up to 100% delirious maps, starting at less than 100 chaos, I'm Tripolar Bear, and I'm here to tell you that Herald of Ash Fire Blade Vortex is exactly the build you are looking for. This build has the best and most satisfying clear speed with very minimal budget. On even a 5-link Impulsas and my 100 chaos setup, you will be able to clear T16 4 Scarab, 4 Sextant, super juiced maps. And 50 of that 100 chaos in the budget is just on an inspired learning because it's more fun. This is going to feel just like Herald of Thunder Bomber, but it will actually have amazing single target, hitting upwards of 10 million with moderate investment and 25 million with expensive but reasonable investment. This build is not made to fight bosses for extended periods of time, since most of our sustain comes from the Cinder Swallow Flask, giving us life and energy shield on kill. You will also get one-shot sometimes by rippy maps and rippy legions if you're not careful. This build is for completing super juiced maps with huge explosions and less about surviving. Although you shouldn't die every map, it will happen eventually if you're not careful in the Delirium or Legion encounters. So, how does Blade Vortex scale its damage? Well, Blade Vortex is a physical spell that causes ethereal blades to spin around you for a duration. We will take all the physical damage this ability does and convert it into fire damage through the use of Avatar of Fire, Anointments, and later on the quiver Signal Fire. We convert all physical damage to fire so that we can take advantage of Herald of Ash, giving extra physicalist fire and more fire damage overall, as well as an enormous explosion of fire damage that will chain with our Impulses chest and later on our rare physical explosion chest, which we also convert to fire, as well as crit and increase its area of effect. We are mainly going to scale our clear and single target through increased fire damage, gaining physical as extra fire, and critical strike multiplier as we are assassin and get a ton of free crit strike chance. All of this scaling will allow our explode chest to crit and its explosion to be converted to fire to scale even harder as well because it is a physical explosion on the explode chest. This lets us use all the fire increased, all the fire conversion, and all the gained physical as extra fire in conjunction with crit multi and ambush and assassinate, giving more critical strike chance on enemies that are on full life and more crit multi when enemies are on full life as well. The cheap and moderate tier of gear will start with rare wands with spell damage, and later on we're going to use void batteries for the maximum power charge and spell damage per power charge that we get from void battery. Now, once we start investing heavily into the build, we're going to swap to using a bow, letting us give Empower a ton of levels, which in turn gives our Blade Vortex a ton of levels as well. This also lets us use the quiver Signal Fire, which gives us 50 physical to fire conversion and extra fizz as fire damage, which accounts for nearly half of all of the damage we deal later on. This quiver is crazy. This is what lets us use a bow as our main weapon. The clear in this build comes from a combination of Impulsa Explosion and Herald of Ash. We use both to guarantee our explosions clear the entire screen after hitting just one monster with our Blade Vortex setup. If your Impulsa Explosion doesn't kill nearby monsters, your Herald of Ash will make sure they're taken care of, which causes another Impulsa Explosion, chaining back and forth until there are no monsters left to explode. This amazing duo lets us one-shot Legion Monoliths and easily takes care of entire screens of monsters. Our main defense with this build will be the fact that everything around us will be constantly exploding, alongside constant movement and mechanical skill. Acrobatics, phase acro, and elusive dodge will help out in the early tiers of play when you don't have too much gear. Our sustain comes from the Cinder Swallow Flask and an instant life flask in the cheap and moderate tier of play. For our ascendancies, we will start with Unstable Infusion for Normal Lab, giving us power charges on crit and non-crit, as well as maximum power charges. From Cruel Lab, we'll pick up Deadly Infusion for crit multi per power charge and base global critical strike chance, as well as some movement speed at max power charges. From Merc Lab, we'll pick up Mistwalker for the elusive on crit, attack, and cast speed while elusive, reduced damage taken while elusive, elusive effect, and no extra damage from crits while elusive. Lastly, from Uber Lab, we'll pick up Ambush and Assassinate to assist our explosions crit strike chance, and to give us Culling Strike on our critical strikes, which means enemies hit at 10% life or lower are instantly killed on hit. The best part of this build is the insanely free clear speed we get from Impulsas and Herald of Ash when combined with Assassin's free crit and crit multi, letting us destroy T16 Delirium maps with 100 chaos or less invested. Alright, let's get into the path of building this all-in-one setup. Let's start with our leveling tree. We're a shadow. We're going to come out of here saving points. This will be nice for later on. When we don't really want this elemental damage, we'd rather have the extra 2 points. So we're going to come out of here, grab Trickery, come get life, crit and crit multi, more spell damage, and we'll get the area of effect and damage, and the maximum life and all resistance nodes here. Next, we're going to come down to phase acro and acrobatics to get us some survivability. We're going to grab these hybrid life and energy shield nodes, and we're going to come over here to Heart and Soul and grab some more life and more mana, as we don't need too much damage for this setup since it's not a league start, and we can kind of boost it and cheese our leveling with a tabula so we can kind of focus more on the life and the survivability. Remember to do your lab, normal lab, at Act 4 or sometime before Act 5. Next, for Cruel Lab, we're going to pick up the power charge and the life over here because now we are Assassin. We do get power charge on crit and not crit strikes, and we get even more bonuses once we do Cruel Lab at 55. We'll come up through Witch, grabbing another power charge and spell damage per power charge, life, and this really neat power charge wheel, giving us mana regeneration, critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, and damage per power charge, as well as a minimum power charge. For Merc Lab, we're going to come over here to Throat Seeker and grab the critical strike multiplier. We're going to come over here and grab the spell crit multi and critical strike chance for spells. And we'll come all the way over here for even more crit and crit multi for spells, some life and chaos resistance, and our last power charge from the tree. Remember to do your Merc Lab before you do Kitava, and grab Mistwalker for free elusive. Now, for our cheap tree setup, we are going to pick up Avatar of Fire. This is very important as this is where we get 50% of our physical conversion for our Blade Vortex. We are also going to use a medium Thread of Hope. You don't need this, but it is very, very nice and very point efficient for the damage it gives. We'll pick up Divine Fury for 5 Fizzes extra, fire damage, and some Ellie damage, 50 elemental damage, and some more physical as extra damage and elemental and physical damage. We'll also pick up Arcane Capacitor, giving us Arcane Surge on kill and increase effect of Arcane Surge. Now that we're in maps, we're going to use an Inspired Learning. These are very cheap and they are so much fun, giving you 1 rare monsters modifier when you kill them for 20 seconds. All you need is to have 4 of these notables within its radius. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the prime spot for an Inspired Learning setup. We are also going to fill out all of the jewel sockets with global crit multi and life, or if you need it, you can do all resistance. And if you need the stats, you can also do dexterity as well. Although we do pick up practical application for the strength and the dexterity that it provides. In our moderate tier, we are going to pick up a large cluster setup and 2 mediums, as well as Calamitous Visions. In the large, all you need is Doriani's Lesson, as this gives us elemental damage leached as life, which is very nice. On our mediums, we pick up Vast Power for area damage and AoE per power charge, making our Impulsa, Herald of Ash, and Blade Vortex much bigger. Magnifier as well for the other mod, for AoE, area damage, and crit multi. The same on the other medium cluster. In one of the small cluster jewel sockets, we're going to put Calamitous Visions, giving us Lone Messenger, 50% more effective Herald buffs, and 50% more damage over time from Herald skills. While this does disable other aura skills we might want to use, this is more than worth it because we do rely on our Herald of Ash to boost us so much, as well as another explosion to pick up where Impulsa might miss some monsters. In our expensive tree, we are going to get an Unnatural Instinct so that we can take advantage of the Herald buff effect nodes here, as well as reduced mana reservation for our Herald skills. We also get a couple neat little bonuses as well, those being 6% Chaos Resistance, 5% Curse Effect, and a little bit of block and some mana. We will also, once we hit the expensive tier, pick up a second cluster jewel setup. Now we are dropping some life to get this second cluster jewel setup. If you are not comfortable with that, 1 cluster jewel setup is totally fine, but I prefer getting even more area of effect from Vast Power and Magnifier for another huge boost in our AoE for explosions. Next, let's talk about how you are going to level this build. To start off, as Shadow, we're going to pick up Stormblast Mine and use that with Swift Assembly, Added Lightning, and Added Cold at level 8. We are also going to take advantage of the vendor recipe for wands. A magic wand, a ruby ring, alteration. At level 20, we're going to do the wand recipe yet again. Now, you only do this one at level 20 because we're going to use a rare ring now, which is going to make your wand a level 20 required only. So we do a normal ring for level 8 onwards and a rare ring for level 20 onwards. This wand recipe adds a ton of flat damage, making our leveling much faster. Now, once we hit level 12, we are going to use a wand recipe setup alongside our Blade Vortex. We're going to do Blade Vortex, Added Fire, Added Lightning, Added Cold, Controlled Destruction, and Faster Casting. In a tabula, our movement skill is going to be Flame Dash and Smoke Mine, with the Detonate Mine on left mouse button, allowing us to use Smoke Mine, detonate it while holding left mouse button down, and then Flame Dashing, which makes our clear while we level so much faster, Smoke Mine giving us movement speed buff and comboing so well with Flame Dash. Our auras we will get from Act 2 will be Herald of Ash, Herald of Ice, and at level 24, we replace Herald of Ice with Hatred for extra cold damage from our physical Blade Vortex. For our curse, we are going to use Flammability in Self-Cast until we can get Hex Touch. Then we will do Wave of Conviction for the exposure it applies, Hex Touch, and Flammability. We will pick up a Cast When Damage Taken setup once we hit Act 6, Lily. That will be Cast When Damage Taken and Immortal Call. And at 38, we are going to swap out all of our gems and pick up Unleash, which is going to let us cast Blade Vortex much less frequently. It's going to be Blade Vortex, Unleash, Elemental Focus, Controlled Destruction, Power Charge on crit for the more damage per power charge, and Conk Effect, letting us deal much more damage with only having to get a little bit closer. To level this build, like we talked about, we're going to use vendor wands, magic wand, ruby ring, and an alteration. When you vendor that, you get flat fire to spells. This is very nice while we level, as it is a huge source of flat damage. On this, you will also craft a resistance so that we can be resistance capped. In our helmet, it will be a gold rim. Our body is a tabula. Our gloves, a Hrimburn. Wanderlust for our boots. Karui Ward for extra movement speed and dex and strength. And Lihoop of All in our rings for extra elemental resistance and damage and attributes. And our belt is going to be an all resistance string of servitude, letting us have capped resistances throughout the entire leveling process. While I level, I like to use 2 instant life flasks as soon as I can equip them. A diamond flask, since we will be a crit build, a silver flask with movement speed on it, making us much faster, and lastly a quicksilver with increased duration and freeze immunity. Now let's talk about our mapping skill setup. While we map, we will just use Blade Vortex, but anytime we pop a Legion or when we get to a map boss or Conqueror, we will use Vol Blade Vortex as an entire other second Blade Vortex setup that will also hit whatever we want it to, as it has its own AI and will move towards whatever boss or whatever Conqueror we will be fighting at the time. We will use Unleash to save us a lot of time on casts. This lets us save up 3 casts of Blade Vortex, casting them all at once, giving us 4 blades, later on 5 when we get a better helmet. Elemental Focus, giving us a lot of elemental damage as we will be dealing mainly fire. Controlled Destruction for more spell damage. Conk Effect, giving us a ton more damage. And Power Charge on crit, because we are stacking so many power charges, we get a lot more damage from this setup. Our Herald of Ash setup is very important while we're mapping. You want to get a high leveled Herald of Ash. You want to get at least a level 2 to 3 enhance, although level 3 enhance is not that expensive. It is very nice as it adds a lot of quality, giving us even more fire damage. We will also use Swift Affliction to deal more damage over time, and it's going to deal its damage a lot faster. And lastly, increased area of effect to make our Herald of Ash explosion much bigger, which allows us to compensate for our Impulse's explosion if it does not kill everything on the screen. For our curse setup while mapping, we are going to do Wave of Conviction with Hex Touch, which will apply flammability on hit, giving minus fire resistance and an extra 25 chance to ignite, going hand in hand with the combustion support, giving more fire damage, a chance to ignite, and enemies ignited by this skill have minus 19 fire resistance, adding up to a total of minus 69 fire res. Nice. Our movement setup is going to be Dash, Second Wind, and Arcane Surge if you do not have the Thread of Hope. If you do, you could replace Arcane Surge with any other ability you want, maybe a Portal Gem. In our gloves, we are going to put Vol Righteous Fire. Vol Righteous Fire is very nice and very important for our damage. Alongside Vol Blade Vortex, we are going to save up uses of the Vol Righteous Fire and Vol Blade Vortex for bosses, high HP targets that we need to take down as fast as possible. Vol Righteous Fire grants 28 more spell damage. This is so much damage. Check this out. With Vol Righteous Fire on, we deal 2 million damage per second with our Blade Vortex, but with it off, we lose like 500,000 damage. That is crazy. For just having one extra button to click, you get an extra 20% of your damage. That's insane. We're going to also link this to Second Wind, allowing us to use it much more often with increased cooldown recovery, alongside a cast and damage taken and a Mortal Call setup, helping us shore up our defenses when we can take a little bit of damage. Lastly, even when we have Calamitous Visions, which, remember, this last line, your aura skills are disabled. Even with our aura skills disabled, we can use Arctic Armor, as it is not technically an aura. Remember, we did the same with Herald of Thunder last league. Arctic Armor is technically a duration spell, so we can still use it while we have Calamitous Visions. because it allows us to take less fizz and fire damage from hits, as well as this league giving us an anomalous version. This anomalous version lets us freeze enemies for 350 milliseconds when hit. That is about 1/3 of a second, with a 20% chance to freeze when we are hit. We can use elemental proliferation to proliferate or spread this freeze in an area from whatever hits us, which is very, very nice for our survivability. With our last socket here being open for a portal setup if you would like. Before we talk about the expensive mapping gem setup, let's head on over to the gear section. For our cheap gear at 100 chaos, we are going to use just normal vanilla 2 chaos wands that we can find on the Path of Exile trade website. We just are looking for spell damage, added fire to spells, and crit multi. You should be able to pick up these for 1 to 2 chaos each, as they add a ton of damage. Our helmet is going to be just life and resistance, and if you can find it, a little bit of chaos res. Our body armor is going to be impulses, of course, for the explosion, and a 5-link impulses right now is only like 15 to 20 chaos. It's crazy. Our gloves are going to be Storm's Gift to proliferate these shocks, right? We don't have a way to shock, but these gloves give us a way to spread shocks within a radius of 15 anytime we kill something. Our boots are going to be life, resistance, and movement speed. Our amulet is going to be Zoph's Blood, which is only like 15 chaos this league. It's crazy. Everything is so cheap. We get max life, fire res, 10% increased strength, 10 fire pen. We cover enemies in ash when they hit us, and we get Avatar of Fire, which we can save an extra point on. That's insane. On this amulet, we're going to anoint Magmatic Strikes. This is very important, as it gives us an additional 20 of our physical converted to fire and 5 fizz as extra fire. Our rings, don't worry. These are the cheap ones. It's just buff effect. These are like 5 to 10 chaos. Don't fall for the meme of the expensive rings. You do not need them. Buff effect is all you need, and these are crazy, dude. They add 19% of our damage for 10 chaos. Dude, we're getting 500,000 damage for 10 chaos rings. This is crazy. And of course, it wouldn't be a tripolar bear build without Abyssco's Leash giving us Rampage, which is a kill counting buff that gives us move speed and damage per kill up to 1,000 kills. It also gives us rarity per 15 Rampage kills, which we can easily achieve 1,000 Rampage kills when we're doing these Delirium maps, as all we have to do is cause an explosion once every 5 seconds, which as it turns out is pretty easy on this build. The most important flask that we need to grab is going to be Cinder Swallow. Cinder Swallow gives us 3% of our life and energy shield when we kill an enemy during the flask effect. It also is a silver flask, so we get onslaught from it as well. This flask allows us to clear these huge packs and instantaneously get all of our life and energy shield back as long as we're not one shot. Alongside this, in the cheap tier, we're going to use an instant bleed removing life flask, a diamond flask that gives us curse immunity, a granite flask giving us increased armor, which gives us a lot of physical damage reduction, and lastly, a quicksilver with freeze immunity. Now, you can get the bleed, the curse, and the freeze on any one of these flasks. This is just how I have it set up. On our cheap tree, we're going to use a medium thread of hope, as I showcased before, filling out the other 2 jewel sockets with global crit multi in life and in inspired learning if you can afford it. I highly recommend it, as it makes mapping much more fun. When you pick up some of those very fun rare mods like Soul Eater or HEIST buffs, you just feel it instantly. You go so much faster, you get bigger. It is awesome. Now, upgrading from the cheap tier to the moderate tier, we are going to pick up 2 Void Batteries, as these are 70 chaos each right now. This gives us an extra max power charge for each of them and increased spell damage per power charge. Most of the rest of the gear is going to remain the same, with our helmet being life and res, impulses, and storm gift gloves, movement speed and life and res on the boots, Soft's Blood Amulet, the same rings with buff effect and maybe some fire resistance, Bisco's Leash, and the same flasks, but our tree is going to be a little bit different now. We are going to drop the acro and phase acro cluster so that we can get huge area of effect medium clusters and Calamitous Vision. So much of our damage right now comes from the Calamitous Vision Jewel and allocating Lone Messenger. 800,000 DPS from just this one point is so much value. Like I mentioned before, these medium clusters are very nice and affordable right now, as they're only 20 to 30 chaos each. For how much area of effect you get, these are so value, it's crazy. Any other jewel sockets you get, just fill them with whatever you need. If you don't need resistance or dex or strength, feel free to fill all these jewel sockets with global multi and maximum life. Alright, going into the expensive tier is going to be a little different than jumping from the cheap to the moderate tier. In the expensive tier, you need to know how to craft this bow. So let's talk about it. You are going to take any 6-link bow base, and I recommend getting it 6-linked first, and if you can, getting it colored as well. You want to try to have 3 white sockets and all the other ones being blue if you can help it, as our mapping setup is going to be 4 blues, 1 green, and 1 red. We cannot have more than 1 green on our bow. So getting a low dex requirement bow or just buying it with the correct colors right off the bat is going to save you so much time and so much hassle. All right, now we're going to talk about how to craft the bow that you want to use. We're going to search for a bow that has implicit critical strike multi. It's non-unique, it has 6 links, and it has 3 white sockets with only 1 being red and 1 being green. There are many bases like this up, and I got mine for 85 chaos, although you might have to pay upwards of 100 or more. So, now that we have our bow base, we're going to go and buy Essences of Woe. We want to get Deafening Essence of Woe, as when we use this on a 2-handed weapon, it can increase our spell damage by up to 144%, which is very nice. So, these cost about 10 chaos. You probably want to start with them one at a time. So we're going to use this on our 6-link bow base. It's going to guarantee at least the spell damage, but there will be other bad mods on there. So from here forward, we will need to annul them. Now we want to make sure we have all of our prefixes open. It's okay to have 1 bad suffix, and you'll see later on that I think about this for a little bit. I get the lightning resistance, and I decide that I am fine with having lightning resistance, as in the next step, there was a chance for it to be removed. All right, we have our bow base. It's 6-linked, got the right colors. Now it has the good spell damage roll on it. And we need to annul down until that is the only prefix, and there should only be at most 1 other suffix on this item. So you see, I've failed a few times. I had to buy a couple, but annulments aren't that expensive, and these essences aren't too pricey, although it does kind of hurt when you annul it on the first try 2 times in a row, but who's counting? Next step is going to be that you either contact me for the cannot roll attack modifiers craft, or you do Plague Maw 5 on your own and go kill Eber in the crystal ore veins. So once you have this craft, it will cost 1 exalt to craft this onto your bow. So make sure you only have the spell damage prefix and at most 1 other stinky suffix. In this case, mine is lightning resistance. We will craft cannot roll attack modifiers onto our bow now, and we are going to take it over to Einhar. Now you do need specific beasts for this craft. The beast we need is going to be any 3 rare beasts and the Ferric Wolf Alpha. The beast craft we're going to be using is add a prefix, remove a random suffix. So we put on cannot roll attack modifiers. The only prefix on a bow that is not an attack mod is going to be the +1 to socketed gems. So we can force that on there. Now, if you did leave a stinky suffix on your item, this is a 50-50 on whether it's going to remove the craft or your stinky suffix. In this case, mine was lightning resistance. Now, as you see, unfortunately, it did remove the craft instead of the lightning resistance, but that's okay. I'm fine with it. I can probably use this lightning resistance roll as it is 37%, and that's not that bad. And I'm not crafting for perfect items just yet. So now the next step is going to be either contacting me, or if you have the crafts yourselves, you can have 3 crafted modifiers followed by +2 to socketed support gems, and the last good craft we can do is going to be 10% chance to deal double damage. Now, if you don't have all of these, you can contact me, but the price on the bench to craft these is going to be 4 exalts and 1 divine total. 2 exalts for the can have, and 2 exalts for the +2 supports, with 1 divine being for the deal double damage. Now, this is an amazing bow, and it's going to be almost our perfect endgame item, and it's going to be good enough to use for the entire life of the character until people start crafting some crazy mirror tier gear, and until we can start to afford that crazy mirror tier gear. If this bow wasn't enough to convince you to drop void batteries, this quiver should. Alright, this quiver is crazy. It gives us 50 fizz converted to fire. So we only need Avatar of Fire and this quiver, and we have 100% of our Blade Vortex converted. We also get 35 fizz as extra fire damage, giving us half of our current damage. On this quiver, we can also get the Corruption to gain even more physical damage as extra fire damage. This quiver alone is giving this setup 13.5 million damage. This quiver is so good, and it is the main reason why we are able to use a bow. The bow and the quiver are the very first things I would recommend upgrading to off of the moderate tier. In our helmet slot, we are going to use a Warlord and Redeemer helmet that we awaken orb together to get +1 max power charge, and Unleash having +1 max number of seals, which lets us get 5 Blade Vortex blades per cast instead of 4, making it much easier to maintain 10 Blade Vortex stacks, requiring only 2 full casts with Unleash instead of 2.5 or 3 full casts, and it's being a little weird because it's 4 and 4, which is 8, and then you do another one at 2. It's really weird, but with this helmet, it's just 5 and 5, and we're capped, alright? On this enchant, we want Blade Vortex duration, so we don't have to cast as many BVs. On top of this, you can multi-mod this with life and resistance, or you can just deal with whatever random stuff the Awakener Orb gives you. Our body armor is going to be an Explode chest, Awaken Orbed with Frenzy Charge on hit, which isn't too crazy at the start, but later on, when you farm up enough to get a Badge of the Brotherhood, this is going to be your Frenzy Charge source. Whatever you get on here is fine. The main stuff, just like the helmet, is the 2 influence mods, Explosion and Frenzy Charge. Our gloves are going to be just life and resistance, as much as you can get, as well as some dexterity if you do need it. Our boots are going to be as much life as we can get, resistance, movement speed, and of course, Tailwind if we've crit recently, which is pretty often. Tailwind is nice because it gives us extra action speed, which is just making us cast and move faster. Our amulet is going to allocate Heart of Flame. Now that we don't need all of the physical conversion, we can simply just get fire damage, fire pen, and fire damage leash says yes. We are also going to use an Elder Amulet, which is pretty nice because we can gain another 15 of our fizz as extra fire damage, as well as getting whatever life, resistance, dex, or a little bit of spell damage, anything you can get to shore up all your res and stat needs. If you want, you can also still use Zoph's Blood to save a point and get a little bit more life. but you do lose a little bit of damage, as that gain fizz as extra fire is so crazy. That's why Signal Fire is so amazing. In our rings, and this is the last thing I would ever upgrade on this build, we are going to get Herald of Ash buff effect and the fire damage while affected by Herald of Ash. Now these are like 17 exalts each. This is like the absolute almost last thing I would upgrade. I would way rather get Headhunter and Badge of the Brotherhood before these rings, as the buff effect alone is crazy, and the fire damage is kind of just a nice boost. In our belt, we are going to get just life, resistance, and craft aspect of the spider. Now, when you do get the aspect of the spider craft, you will have to get some reduced mana reservation somewhere. You can get this from this little wheel here. All you'll have to do is sacrifice some points, some multi, anything on the tree that you feel comfortable with sacrificing to get just a couple reduced mana reservation nodes on the tree. Otherwise, feel free to use Bisco still at this point, as it is super fun and you still get quant and rarity. For our flasks, in the expensive tier, I'm going to hope that you understand how Wise Oak works. Whichever of your uncapped resistance is the highest is the one that Wise Oak gives you penetration for. So, our fire resistance needs to be the highest resistance uncapped that we have. This lets us penetrate 15 fire resistance, as well as take 10% of whichever elemental resistance is the lowest. We are still going to use a Diamond Flask, a Cinder Swallow, and now we are going to get a Bottle of Faith, giving us base crit and making whatever is on Consecrated Ground take more damage. And here we are still going to use a Quicksilver with freeze immunity. Now in this expensive tier, we are going to sacrifice some more nodes to pick up an entire other cluster setup for even more area of effect, and getting at least Lord of Drought for flammability, curse effect, and AoE, Prismatic Heart if you can for the all res and Ellie damage, and Widespread Destruction for more area of effect and elemental damage. We will also be picking up an Unnatural Instinct to grant us all the bonuses from the Herald Wheel. Now, if you have extra money and want to get a little bit more life, you can swap out these cheap Magnifier and Vast Power mediums for an expensive version that gives you Vast Power, so the area of effect per power charge, and a Towering Threat, which is AoE and 8% max life. So now that we're at the expensive tier, let's talk about how the gems are going to change here, as I didn't want to confuse the cheap and moderate tier players. So, now that we have a Blade Vortex in a bow with +1 socketed gems and +2 supports, we are going to use an Empower, which gets boosted all the way to level 7, giving +6 levels to our Blade Vortex setup. We are going to deck out all the rest of the gems with Awaken versions, starting with Awaken Ellie Focus, then Awaken Control Destruction, and lastly Awaken Unleash, as it is very expensive right now. Since we have a 6th link in our bow, we are going to use the 6th link in our chest piece now for a Wave of Conviction Omega Curse setup, alright? We're endgame, we're expensive, you're juicing, you're doing Delirium maps, you got a lot of money. Well, now you can buy Awaken Hex Touch, and linked to Wave of Conviction, we are going to use Flammability, Assassin's Mark, Elemental Weakness, and Combustion, picking up Whispers of Doom now that it is towards the right side of the tree, getting an additional curse, and Awaken Hex Touch, letting us apply one more curse as well. This gives us so much damage, it is insane. Combustion, of course, even reducing more fire resistance. Our Herald of Ash setup is going to be Herald of Ash at as high a level as you can, Enhance at level 4, giving a ton of quality, Awaken Swift Affliction, and Awaken Increased Area of Effect. Our gloves are going to be Righteous Fire, remembering to pop that on bosses, as it gives us 6 million damage. Increased duration, cast when damage taken, and Immortal Call. We are going to use Dash and Second Wind with anomalous versions of all of these, including Arctic Armor, with still Elemental Proliferation, so we can prolif those freezes when monsters hit us while we have Arctic Armor. And lastly, Aspect of the Spider. If you do pick up an Aspect of the Spider belt, remembering to get reduced mana reservation on the tree somewhere so that you can actually use Aspect of the Spider. Now, this is the last level of juice, okay? We are going to go to the Headhunter and Badge of Brotherhood setup. Now, you have to make sure all your resistances are super figured out, as we're now giving up our Amulet and our Belt slot to get Headhunter and Badge of the Brotherhood. Now, Badge of the Brotherhood is so insane because now that we've stacked so many power charges, we get that many frenzy charges as well. We also get a ton of cooldown recovery of travel skills and a ton of elusive effect, making us run and dodge much more frequently and allowing us to spam our dash, which is going to be so long because it is anomalous as well. This makes our clear speed skyrocket through the roof, but this is the 150 plus exalt tier, as Badge of the Brotherhood is like 44 exalts, Headhunter is like 72. These are like some of the last upgrades you get, but I would definitely get them before I would even consider getting just some fire damage on our Circle of Anguish. Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with it. Hopefully you enjoy this as much as we enjoyed Herald of Thunder Bomber last week. This one takes one extra button press, whatever. We get a ton of single target, alright? It's definitely worth it, trust me. Anyways, catch me at Twitch, catch me on YouTube, whatever one you prefer. I'll see you guys out there. I'm juicing maps. I'll teach you how to juice maps. I'll catch you later. Peace out.